Recently, I've been rereading the Call of Duty Zombies comics. This is because right now, Call of Duty Zombies isn't as fresh in our minds as it normally is, or at least Treyarch Zombies isn't as fresh in our mind as it normally is. For the past 2 years, we've been occupied by other things. Everything from IW zombies to World War II zombies, and other games such as Fortnite have really dominated the forefront of gaming. It's been a while since we've given Treyarch Zombies a good, hard, critical analysis. We're quite frankly kind of rusty at the zombie storyline, and it never hurts just to reread the Call of Duty Zombie comics, give ourselves a refresher, and when you're looking at it now with a fresh set of eyes, and eyes that hasn't given it much critical thought for a few months now, you notice things and pick up on things that maybe you didn't notice originally. For example, I noticed something odd as I was reading the final installment of the Call of Duty Zombies comic, and I want to bring it up to you guys today because I can't tell if this is a mistake, a plot hole that Treyarch has left in their story, or if there's something else going on here that maybe we should be paying more attention to. I want to first establish the fact that we know Victus went to Mob of the Dead to meet up with Richtofen in his lab under Alcatraz. It clearly states in the timeline, July 4th, 1941. Richtofen returns to the lab under Alcatraz where he meets Victus, arriving from the empty earth with a chronorium. Upon reading the chronorium, Richtofen discovers numerous timelines documenting their fates and learns about the blood vials. He would later write on the page, "I know what I must do." Edward Richtofen, July 4th, 1941. Richtofen enters a rift to acquire the blood of Sal and Finn. After delivering the blood to his younger self and recovering the blood vials belonging to Victus, he returns. Victus is placed on ice to be kept safe until they're needed next. So it very clearly states that they're at Alcatraz, they're under the lab, and then Richtofen goes on his journey to get the blood, and he delivers the blood to his younger self, and then Victus is placed on ice until they're needed next. However, when we read the comics, that's not what happens. Victus is teleported to the house, as it's very clearly seen in this panel. And I know what you're saying, John, how do we know that this isn't Richtofen's lab? Well, compare it to the scene we saw in the Revelations prologue. This is when our Primus crew teleports into the house, and then this is when the Victus crew teleports. You'll notice that the computers to the left side of the room are exactly the same. There's the same dresser on the right side of the room. The teleporter is a circular machine in the center. You can even see the wooden beams on the ceiling are identical. To me, this is the house. In addition to that, there's also a panel where Richtofen says, "We should be quiet. The kids are asleep upstairs." Well, the kids wouldn't be asleep upstairs in Alcatraz. That would make no sense. The kids were teleported to the house, and they live in the house where they're safe. So the kids would have never been taken to Alcatraz. It makes absolutely no sense from a storyline perspective. So if the room to me is identical to the room from the Revelations prologue, which clearly shows our characters teleporting into the house, and Richtofen says the kids are upstairs, then Victus does not teleport to Alcatraz. Victus is teleported to the house within Revelations, which is weird. This diverges from the timeline. So, and then if we continue to read the comic, we'll see Richtofen goes on his blood mission. He gets some of the blood from his zombified self. He then goes to Alcatraz and picks up the blood of Sal and Finn. After that, we see Richtofen teleport back in time to his younger self and give him some of the blood vials, saying, "Trust me, Edward, you will need this blood. When the time comes, it will protect you." We then see Richtofen teleport to the house. Now, this next panel is a little bit confusing. Richtofen says, "Back once more to this cursed prison. I know the rules are different here, perhaps different enough. I suppose we shall see." Now, I know what you're saying, John. Richtofen says back to this cursed prison. Clearly, he's at Alcatraz, and I don't think he's actually at Alcatraz. I think he's being a little bit more metaphorical when he calls it a prison. He's describing the house like a prison, as if they're trapped here and they want to get out. And he says the rules are different here. Well, the rules aren't really different at Alcatraz, but the rules are definitely different within Monty's perfect world. So I think that when he says cursed prison, he's not actually being literal. If that's also not proof enough that Richtofen has teleported back to the house, we can just go to the next scene. When Richtofen returns to our characters, you'll notice that they've pretty much stayed put. They haven't left the house, so it's not like they could have been teleported to a new area. You'll notice that the walls are pretty much the same. And then they go into these pods where they're put on ice, as described in the timeline, except in the timeline, we're pretty sure they're at Alcatraz. The timeline doesn't mention them ever leaving Alcatraz, but it mentions them arriving at Alcatraz. In the comic, we never see them arrive at Alcatraz. We never see them follow Richtofen to Alcatraz. They go to the house and they stay in the house, which is odd. What are we to believe? Are we to believe that Victus is actually on ice at Mob of the Dead, or are we to believe that Victus is on ice at the house? Which is it? It's an odd little plot hole where you have two different sources of the zombie storyline telling you two different things. Now, there are some explanations, or there are some theories as to why this might be. The first theory is that Treyarch made a mistake, and Treyarch intended to have maybe Victus follow Richtofen to Mob of the Dead or something, and he never did. That's one explanation, but to me, it just seems like too large of an oversight to be a mistake. I mean, when you're designing a comic like this isn't something you just do in an afternoon. This is something that was labored over. Jason and Craig Houston, they wrote the story, so they've probably thought about it several times over, and they made sure it worked with what they already had in their storyline, and then they sent it to an illustrator, and then that illustrator sent them designs, and then they gave B feedback, and then they changed that feedback, and they probably worked on this comic over several months, and this isn't something that I just imagine easily slips through the cracks, especially when you imagine that the design process wasn't just like a snap. I'm sure they've put a lot of thought into this. This has to be deliberate, and it begs the question, why did Treyarch do this? Why are there two different diverging stories within our story? One thought is that there's multiple Victus crews. Now, there can be multiple Victus crews if we consider the fact that there are multiple Primus crews. I mean, we have our Ultimus Primus crew, we have our Primus crew, so it's not that far-fetched to suggest that maybe there are two different versions of our Victus crew, where you have one that's on ice at Mob of the Dead, and you have one that's on ice at Revelations in the house in Monty's Perfect World. It does beg the question, does this crew get wiped away at the end of the Revelations Easter egg? Or maybe this is how Victus goes on to survive Dimension 63 getting destroyed. So if they're on ice in Dimension 63, and then Dimension 63 is destroyed as mentioned in the comics, maybe by having Victus in Monty's Perfect World, this can allow them to maybe eventually be freed from their cryogenic slumber, maybe go back to Mob of the Dead and perhaps rescue their other versions of themselves. Maybe this could be an Easter egg in a future Mob of the Dead remastered. What it does is essentially give Treyarch options. You now have two different Victus crews that you can play with, and Treyarch can do stuff with that and work with it. Maybe that's why they did this. So what we see in the comics doesn't exactly match up with what we see in the timeline. These are fractured universes, where in one universe Victus is placed on ice in the house, and then in another universe Victus is placed on ice in Mob of the Dead. It could be. It's interesting. There's a part of me that says this was a mistake because it just makes the zombie storyline a whole lot simpler. And there's another part of me that says, no, this is too big a mistake to be a mistake. There has to be a deliberate reason, and maybe it plays into a potential Mob of the Dead remastered. I'd love to know what you guys think. I know I spoke about this to Reed, and Reed was like, oh, I tried talking about this months ago, and people told me I was crazy. And now that I look at it and I've just discovered it for myself for the first time, I'm like, no, I think there's something here, Reed. I don't think you're just crazy. There has to be. It's too big a mistake to not be deliberate. I'd love to know what you guys think. Am I crazy like Reed as well, or do you think Reed and I might be onto something? I'd love to know what you guys think. Anyway, I'm going to go. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and bye.